Hey guys, Lady Turin here and welcome to another painting tutorial. Today we'll be taking care of the Empire General, we're just gonna call him Hans, and the horse I feel we just have to name Daisy. So for Daisy, I'm gonna kick it off with known oil. I decided that I would like to paint her legs, or her fur, with a contrast. So I'm starting with known oil to add a little extra depth. Now, I got this idea in my head that I really wanted to have sort of a gradient when it comes to her legs. In Polish, we call this area of a horse's legs just above the hoof socks, if they are different color. I'm not sure if that's the case in English, but either way, I really wanted the socks to be a bit darker, just so Daisy looks as natural as possible. Using Abaddon Black to paint her hooves, and all of that extra care is because I have this gnarly embarrassing memory. When I was an early teen, very early teen with very low painting skills, I used to collect Lord of the Rings miniatures, and there was this batch of mounted Rohirrims, and I gotta tell you guys, the stuff I did to those horses was abominable. I completely messed up the shading, the highlights. Granted, I had no idea that something like washes existed back then, but regardless, I still remember how horrible those horses looked, and I was not to let the same thing happen to Daisy. So Mephiston red to get all over the armor. Daisy needs to match the rest of her Empire friends. And now I'm going back with a Wraithbone to provide some highlights over her legs. Now I'm going to cover all of that with contrast, Wildwood. I wanted Daisy to be almost black, very dark brown, but as you probably know, black is not really a color that occurs in nature, so horses which seem to be black are actually very dark brown. As you can see, I was really stuck with this idea to make the socks sort of darker, so I picked another liquid acrylic in the color Umber and went over the socks again. Now mixing Abaddon Black with Wildwood, I'm trying to achieve the almost black color to treat her tail. Still striving for that almost black, but still very dark brown, natural color. And moving on to metallics, we're gonna start with Leadbelcher to take care of that chainmail that she has. And traditionally, yes, it's one thick, sloppy layer. Some neck armor. Thankfully, we can see her mane, so I don't have to embarrass myself further with my attempts to make her fur and mane and tail and everything look naturally. And here, with my favorite color, the Pallid Witch Flesh, making all the, fabric, I suppose, on Daisy be white. Daisy is proudly carrying some of those Polish colors. Now, the contrast that I probably like the least, because with those yellow undertones, it definitely reminds me of something else than leather. But it was good enough for the saddle. Steel Legion Drab is going to serve as a color for all the straps, but also being used as a dry brush. I'm going to highlight Daisy's fur with that. And I know that contrasts don't really need highlighting, but you know, at that point I was slightly frantic. And I really wanted Daisy to look good. So yep, I was dancing around and applying a lot of different techniques that were probably completely unnecessary so that Daisy just looks fly. Now, instead of Zandri dust, I picked Karak stone to paint the bones, and I could give you an elaborate speech of what a better color Karak stone is, but the truth is I had no idea where Zandri was, so. And now that all the parts which require Nuln are ready to be washed, that's what I'm doing. Because obviously majority of other parts are gold and they're gonna be washed with Reichland Flesh Shade. And here are the parchments that I forgot, but it's fine because I'm going to take care of them now. So using Karak stone to paint over them. They probably should have been gold, but I wanted the writing to be really visible. So I grabbed Abaddon Black and using the brush as sideways as possible, sort of as parallel to the surface of the letters as possible, I kind of dry brushed the letters. Thankfully, they were heavily protruding, so I didn't have to trace them. If I had to trace them, that would have been a disaster. Now, before adding more pop to the letters, because they are pretty dark, I washed them with Nuln. And seriously, that general is quite a sick fanboy of Karl. It's like an equivalent of modern band t-shirts, just having his name everywhere. While Nuln was drying, I grabbed the Retributor armor. That's the gold that we're using for all the Empire army. And I just went with all the edges and trims, trying to be extra careful, not to spill too much gold over the red, but that happened anyway. Most of those appliques were protruding, so again, I didn't have to exactly carefully trace them, but that didn't stop me from spilling the gold everywhere. Now that moon ornament is really interesting. It kind of made me think of Skarsnik. This is the first time I've seen this kind of a moon in Empire symbolisms. And this is just a simple ballpoint pen. It has a really good flow, so doing kind of like dabbing motions instead of exactly tracing, I was able to give a super extra pop to the letters. And now I'm gonna go back with a black pigment marker and add some shadow around the letters. I just wanted them to be visible and easily readable from afar. Back with Nuln oil, just adding a little more shadow because I needed to hide some slight mistakes. So I'm going back and re-washing all the areas where touch-ups were needed. Moving on to washing gold with Reichland Flesh Shade. And Runefang Steel to both highlight the silver areas and later add that extra pop to gold. You might remember if you watched my previous tutorial that adding just a teeny tiny bit of silver to gold highlights, obviously after you highlight them with appropriate lighter gold, which in my case is the auric auric armor, I think. Once gold highlights are done, just giving it a little bit of a silver dab brings in extra shine. Now, dry brushing kind of highlights for the armor to provide hopefully a little bit of texture. I'm using Evil Sun's Scarlet to highlight the red. And now mixing Baneblade Brown with Wildwood to give a bit of natural looking highlights to the tail. It's very liquidy thanks to Wildwood, so there was a bit of spillage. Pallid Witch Flesh, because highlighting Pallid Witch Flesh happens with Pallid Witch Flesh. So I'm going back over all the fabric areas, highlighting them again, keeping the brush sideways so I don't have to trace anything. And like I said, going back with Runefang Steel to give gold that super extra shine. Shining like them dog's balls. Cool, well, that's Daisy for you. Now we're gonna take care of Hans. So Hans was a pain in the ass. I mean, look at that raven. How cute is that raven? I don't know what we're gonna name the raven. You guys let me know. But Hans was a pain in the ass because of all the nooks and crannies. So I'm starting off with all the biggest surfaces, like his cloak, using Mephiston Red. His shield, I decided to paint half and half. So I left half of it white. He's primed with the Wraithbone, so I didn't even bother with putting any other whitish color over it. Kislev Flesh for his skin. Thankfully, I did not adhere Hans to the horse before painting him, because then I would just shoot myself. And I decided to grab Wildwood for all the leather parts, like his gloves and some shoes, which were kind of poorly sculpted, but maybe that was just me not knowing what I'm painting. His armor, I decided to almost entirely paint with Leadbelcher, along with those shin protectors. I'm not really worrying right now about the skull applique in the front. Hans is also going to get jet black hair because he looks like such a witch hunter with his raven here, and I'm going to be pretty tendentious and just name the raven Edgar. How about that? So some Retributor armor to get all over the trims and appliques. Hans here has a pretty sick sword, and obviously Karl Franz's initials on his shield, because putting the name all over his horse wasn't enough. Yeah, touch-ups will be needed, but that's fine. I decided to bring in a little bit of Thousand Suns blue, just to have the feathers in his hat and sort of like a ribbon around it. You'll see in a moment, it's visible in the back right here. I wanted Hans to just boast those traditional Empire colors. Look at it. Look what a peacock he is now. Now, touching up all the little spillages and other smears on the armor and the sword and Edgar and everywhere else. Look at those cute little raven feet. Going with Karak over that skull on his hat, which I like to think is an actual skull, not any sort of ornament. That's a pretty sick fashion move, not gonna lie. In Nuln oil with Reichland, as you know, just to wash every element. I left his clothes white. I'm not even gonna try and say that it wasn't due to laziness. I just figured if I paint his clothing in a different color, it's going to be a disaster, because it was really hard to get to, you know, like different nooks and crannies. I decided the stirrups are gonna be leather as well, but instead of grabbing the snakebite leather to match the saddle, I for some reason grabbed wildwood, but whatever. Washing all the gold elements, and again going back with the ballpoint white pen for an easy way to give Edgar some glowing white eyes. And of course, I wouldn't be myself if I didn't write on every possible surface, so to take a break from all the Karl Franz and Sigmar stuff, Turin is gonna be written on that little ribbon. And on to highlighting all the red elements, like his cloak. And just like the armor, I'm sort of dry brushing instead of tracing the highlights. I'm just trying to avoid those like really visible lines so that it looks like actual light over the elements as opposed to painted highlights. You know what I mean? Pallid witch flesh. Going carefully over his shield and the feather. And out of laziness, also the skull, his clothing. Look at the butt and the front. That needs to shine. Now I grabbed Dark Reaper, which we have always used to highlight black, but I thought it was especially fitting because crows usually have this bluish almost hue to their black feathers. So I was trying to, you know, give Edgar the best treatment such a good bird deserves. Auric armor to highlight the gold elements. Hans is all shiny. And some Runefang steel to highlight both the silver elements and gold elements. Now grabbing super glue to finally put Hans where he belongs, right on Daisy, ready to charge. All the good stuff. Now I unfortunately didn't show you guys how we do the Empire base, but it's really simple. It's just some sand, then some brown over it. Sometimes we use contrast, sometimes we just use Mournfang, which we misplaced, so I had to toy around with different ideas of making the base rim match the rest of the army. I also threw in some orc skull in there. There were 2 rocks. And that's that. That's Hans and Daisy for you guys. Let me know if you like that tutorial, if I should make more. We will also link my Etsy shop in the description. So if you guys would like any sort of custom Warhammer or generally any sort of custom art, you can place commissions there. And that's that, guys. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.